My name's Matthew Williams, or Matthew Arthur Williams, and I'm born in London. I've been in Glasgow now 9 years. Before that I was in London, working in arts administration jobs. Prior to that I was in Manchester where I studied my BA, which was in photography. It wasn't the starting point of my photography, but it was a helpful direction. My tutors in my diploma, which was in Kingston College, I always kind of reference them in a lot of my work because they really got the bug planted in my practice, really, in like the darkroom and kind of like traditional photography. But I've definitely moved around, and I think my work has moved around, and I think it shows in the things that I do in my day-to-day and in my work, and how I use sound, use images, use video, and I think it's a gathering of all of those places and things and people that have influenced it. So that's me. So exciting to be in Dundee, actually, and doing this work here, and all the opportunities that have come before have been amazing as well, time of residency, but it's really amazing to bring it together here, almost like a starting point. I feel like this work is almost like a starting point, and it was buried for quite a long time, asking and begging to be made, and I don't think I was quite ready to approach it until now, and I felt like this was the perfect opportunity to kind of delve into that subject matter and be quite honest and quite vulnerable with that, and then you can then look at the work that I've made over the past 3 to 5 years and be like, okay, that makes sense why that work exists, or it's quite a nice point for me anyway, mentally, to do this. Yeah. While I was trying to come up with a title, I was talking about certain things with certain people, and it kind of just sat, and I was like, well, you can read it, you can understand it, there's nothing too far from it, but it has about 100 different meanings, really, but for just 2 words. And it just sat with me, and I loved it, and I was like, this works, because I guess it's partly due to my background, being from Jamaican parents, and Patois as a language. And the amazing thing about Patois as a language, and English, and all of the history and the colonial history, and just the general kind of just like embodiment some of Patois words have, and the way that you talk with them, because you can listen to them and be like, I understand that, I get it. It's just one way around about going about it. And Soon Come is so open-ended and so amazing and so brutal and so hilarious that I think it references the need to, to be somewhere if somebody's requesting of your time, and you could say, well, I soon come. Or it could also mean that, it could be a white lie, for instance, as what if you a kid, or you'd think about, oh, when's that person coming around? And they said they soon come, and it's been 2 weeks. So in reference to the show, there's a lot of, I guess there's a lot of like longing with that term, and thinking about kind of like migration and people moving away. There's, lots of things that hint to a lost, kind of like a lost person or a missing thing, and it just kind of sat right with me to name it Soon Come. Yeah.
Do you go back to Jamaica, to family?
My mum does it very regularly, and I didn't think she was going to be in the show as important as she was, but she's in the show very much, and the whole family is in the show very much. And I was last there in 2003, which is such a long time ago, and there's some images in the show from that trip. I've used some of the negatives from that trip that we were taking pictures of then, and tried to arc back some of those memories and try to kind of put a bit of fire back into some of those images. Just maybe visually, literally looking at a negative and making it alive again rather than being tucked away. And maybe also looking at what is in those pictures, who were in those pictures, what did it look like then, and even just from a documentary perspective, I suppose. The hard self-portraits, which I call them hard because they're very dark prints, and all of them are printed on fibre-based paper, which is just traditional archival paper that is so robust that it can handle quite a lot of manipulation, but then will do its own thing and warp out and, you know, misbehave in terms of like laying it down. But they're all so different. But the reason why the self-portraits are so dark and so kind of like hard lit, it's almost like I'm there but I'm not, and I'm moving between visibility and kind of invisibility almost. And then with the boat, I'll go into that, it's not very contrasty at all. It's quite floaty and very almost like it's about to fade away. And there's lots of like movement as such in that. In Gallery 1, you've got such a mixture of places, but also just the one place, and that is like I think if people are carrying multiple places, but there's one thing that brings them all together. It's there, and I thought I wanted to bring these people into one space, and it's almost a bit like a memorial, I would say, which it's given importance to something. So you enter the space with me, and you leave the space with me. Not to give myself too much self-importance, but it allows an entry point to the show. The film's predominantly 4K footage. It's not to be biased to one format or to say that it needs to always be analog. I do lean on analog techniques more than I do lean on digital, but I mean, sometimes shooting on 4K footage is so satisfying and really amazing, and also quite accessible. Whereas using 16mm, I mean, this was my first opportunity to use 16mm, and immediately, I think it was another thing which I'd left until this moment to really say, okay, this is the moment this is going to become useful. But there was this kind of like material that I wanted the 16mm to capture with the bodies, and I wanted this kind of almost like tactility to come through, this grain, and also this smoke that I use during it, because I wanted this, I think if I was shooting the industrial landscape on such a real camera, which was shot on the digital camera, I wanted the bodies to feel almost temporal, almost like they're here and they're not here, and that is the case. But also the industrial landscape is also here and not here, but its effects are constantly here. And I wanted the two, I didn't know how they were going to work together in one film, and so I began to break it up, and it began to make sense to maybe have two films that were talking to each other, two screens that were talking to each other, and they did. And one is what you can find in public national archives, and one is what you will have in your personal archive. You know, public, private, and then kind of like national archives, and digging around and trying to hunt for things that you think should be there that isn't there. And why isn't there? Then you begin to question what is valued and what isn't valued. I think for me with it, and like putting it into the work and keeping all of these things really close to the work and close to me, is just like, if you are carrying that, you are part of, you're keeping it alive, it's constantly alive, but you're also holding on to some of those moments, and it's almost like breathing new life into it constantly. And there's some kind of references to Stuart Hall in the show, and he has an essay on the archives, and there's a couple lines where he's just talking about that it should always be reinvestigated, and it changes every time, and it's not a closed book. And I always think about that with this and in general. And sometimes I think these things can get theorized, and really what is left out is a lot of the personal narrative. And I feel like a lot of the everyday person will probably not see themselves in those narratives and feel very much left out, no matter what background. And there's, to be able to kind of see the importance of labour and work and time and how people organise is, you know, it builds you up to continue to doing stuff like that, really. So in small ways, yes, it's an artist's expression, but in other ways it's kind of a little bit of a, I wouldn't call this activism work or anything like that, but you're doing some level of work, and it's a kind of work which you're doing. Yeah, it's quite good, and I think because of there's so many perspectives, and you was talking about Dundee and Stoke, or Scotland, England, Midlands, and there's massive differences. There's miles and miles of differences, but there's also many similarities, and there's many things that people hold on to. I think with Stoke-on-Trent, I've become very emotional with this, like a place like Stoke-on-Trent, because it's like an archive in which I didn't really close the book or the door on it at all. It's always been available and accessible to me, and all the places where you think you've lived over time, they are also in some way still accessible to you, even though you probably live somewhere for 30 years or 40 years or whatever it is. And you still think, oh no, that was my home at one point, and there is parts of my history there and my family history there and stuff like that. I just really like the details of things. I'm always more attracted to the details of like a room or whatever it is, and I think that's how I go about taking photographs or filming material. I think when I look at them now, I mean, to me they all look the same, because you just go for the same things all the time, but maybe to somebody who's never seen my work before, it's like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. And there's a lot of sampling in this, and it's because of there's always these constant echoes, and the sound is quite an interesting thing. It's got wind instruments as like a base layer, and then from there thinking about anything else. And the reason for that is because it's such a bodily thing, and losing your breath and balancing it and maintaining a low level of like breathing something out. So yeah, it's got that in there. I suppose it began to veer down this lane because I was looking through the archives and looking at some of the newsreels, and they were exactly the same as they are today, and these newsreels were from like 1957 or 1955. The same storylines, headlines were identical of what you see right now, and I suppose it's just being aware of maybe like media, being aware of the world in which we live in, the society in which we have, especially when there's conversations about migrants and conversations about borders and things like that. The performance is with my friend Akash, and we've been working together for a little bit, and it was meant to just be him, in this way of like looking after oneself and like taking care and brushing the arms and moisturizing and embalming and doing all this stuff. And while we were filming, it got to a point where I was like, I need to be in this shot. I need to get involved. And it began with this caressing and this kind of like being quite soft and vulnerable. And then it began this kind of grabbing and this tug of war in which the hands are trying to get one up on each other, or like you're trying to, one of them's in control, but then there's something underneath that's pulling you out of control. So it's just this constant weaving in, out, in, out. And that's what the film does. It's in, out with these stories. It's in, out with these landscapes. And it's in, out with these voices as well. Yeah, it's rebirthing some of those stories that aren't so new. They're very old stories, and they definitely need their time over and over again. So yeah.